Hi, in this video we're going to talk about one of the other database options available, and that is auto increment statistics with incremental set to on. Before we can talk about how incremental statistics work, it's important to understand how partitions work first, because this feature is applicable only when you use partitions. Now, in order to understand partitions in a very simple way, you could describe it as a functionality that allows you to split a big table into smaller chunks. And by making the table into smaller chunks, you are able to go ahead and manage the data better. You get some performance benefits, etc. as well. And when the data gets split into smaller chunks, the distribution of the data within the chunk also plays a factor in terms of how SQL Server estimates the resource utilization when querying that table. And this is why incremental statistics is important, because by enabling incremental statistics, we are able to go ahead and specifically tell SQL Server to update the statistic by merging the distribution of the latest partition with whatever data is already available for previous partitions. The best way to understand this is through an example, so let's go ahead and do that right now. In this case, I've got a database that's already partitioned. It's called partition demo, inside which I've got a table called demo, which is split into 8 different partitions and arranged alphabetically, basically. So the letter A is the first partition, the letter B is the second partition, etc. I'm going to check if I have any statistics available on this demo data table at the moment, which I don't, so that's all good. I'm going to start off, I'm going to set auto increment statistics is equal to off, whereas auto create statistics is set to on. So it'll still create a statistic, it's just that it's not an incremental statistic. We can verify that by running this query, but unfortunately right now we haven't created any data, so let's go ahead and do that first. So in this case, I'm loading some data into the demo database table, and once that's done, I'm running a select statement so that auto create statistics will generate a default stat for that table, or specifically that partition. Now if you look over here, you'll see that a statistic has been created. It is auto created, but it's set to auto increment is equal to incremental is set to false. And what this means is that we don't really have an option to update a specific partition should we need it. So let's go ahead and insert some data B at the moment. Now what I'll do is before I run that, I'll just run this query here to show you what that data looks like. If you look over here right now, this stat joins to the DMF DB incremental stat properties, and we don't have incremental stat properties at the moment, and that's why it returns blank rows. But at the same time, we do have a statistic available, and that's why when we run show statistics, we can see the data available here. So we can see that A is present and it's got 714,000 rows in it. So let's go ahead and load B. And when we load B, what's going to happen is that it's going to load the data into the table, but the statistic is still going to point only to the letter A. And as you can imagine, when more and more data gets loaded into the table, we don't want to go back to historical partitions and keep updating their stats, because those are kind of fixed and they don't really change. Unfortunately, what happens is if I try to go ahead and run show statistics at the moment, update statistics, and tell it specifically to only update the statistics for the partition 2, you'll see I get an error message. It says that the update statistics on partition syntax is not supported for non-incremental statistics, and that's where we have the problem. Because when you set it to false, what happens is all statistics are created by default as non-incremental, and that means that you will not be able to access individual partitions. So every time we want to go ahead and update statistics for this table, it's going to be done all the way from the very beginning of the table. And if you have 10 years worth of data and you're only trying to do the current year, you can imagine how much of a problem that'll be. Unfortunately, the solution for this is also a bit difficult, because if you see here, I cannot just simply set the database to on and then try to update the statistics, because that doesn't work. You'll see that the statistic, when it was created, still points to the fact that it was auto increment is off. Right, so you can see here that even though I've set it to on, the statistic was created as a non-incremental statistic, and therefore we have a problem. The only way that this is going to be fixed is by dropping the statistic and creating it again. So let me just go ahead and run this again. Now that the incremental is set to on, when I run this, you'll see that it's showing that the statistics is auto created and it's incremental as well, which means that now I can specifically tell it to update the statistic for only the partition 2. And that would look something like this. Now that we have an incremental partition, you'll see that the first partition was created at 1635.57, and the second one is created at 16:36:12, and you'll see that there is a difference in time when the statistics were updated, and that gives us the advantage of being able to bifurcate the data and only update statistics when we're looking for a specific partition. This is typically useful for scenarios where you're querying only the latest data, and it's more important for you to have the latest data partitioned and stats updated. Previously, what we used to do was we used to create filtered statistics, etc. for this, but now with this incremental stats, you can see how we don't need to worry about how large the table is, because we always have the ability to update a specific partition. Let me just try this again really quick. I'll just now that I've loaded the letter C, we've got 3 partitions, so I'm saying update the statistics and resample 3, and you'll see that when I did 3, the timestamp for 3 over here is different, and that way we're able to make sure that only the latest partition is always updated when the statistics are refreshed. Now, having said that, the point I'm trying to make here is that so far we've covered a couple of different database properties, and they all seem to have certain optimal values. For example, we've already talked about auto close, which should always be set to false, and we've also talked about auto create statistics, which should always be set to true. And as you can see here, if you're using partition tables, you should set it to true. And even if you aren't using partition tables, you can see that later when you decide to set a table into a partition table, you will need to go ahead and kind of like get rid of the statistics and update them. So you can always just go ahead and enable it to true, even though you don't have partition tables, because if you don't have them, it's not going to really do anything. But when you do decide to have partition tables, your statistics will already support partition level sampling and updating of statistics. So that's pretty much it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.